Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Watches and Style channel. We are live from Los Angeles and we are going to talk about watches. There's some very interesting new releases from AP, and I think it will pick up on a thread from our discussion of last night. They are, I think, very interesting releases that are worthy of discussion. I will, as always, start with a little bit of warm up, talk about some of the stuff that I posted on Instagram, and some of these posts actually have started going viral and resulted in some interesting connections, which we will talk about in the next few days, hopefully before the end of the week. But let's start with where we were. Um, you guys know I covered the U.S. Open quite extensively over the last 2 weeks or so, and wrote about some of the interesting watches that have come up in the process. This was more than just watches, of course. Sergio Perez, Checo Perez was in attendance with his wife, Carola Martinez, and they were actually sitting in the same box as Tommy Hilfiger and his wife. And obviously, that wasn't a coincidence. As you probably know, Checo just signed as one of the two drivers of the new Cadillac F1 team. So you should expect to see him more and more around these kinds of events. I fully expect them to be on ringside for the Canelo Crawford fight. I mean, it's his compatriot, compadre, so to speak, and also the event roughly coincides with the Mexican Independence Day weekend. Cadillac is, um, as you guys know, a US based team technically, although their facilities are, I think, divided between the US and the UK. So this is going to be really interesting. But he was there. He was sitting with the clothing sponsors of the new Cadillac F1 team, Tommy Hilfiger, and he was wearing a Patek, which he might not be able to wear once he's back on the grid, because who knows? I mean, I don't think Patek Philippe will be the uh, horological endorsement for the new Cadillac F1 team, though. Who knows, right? Crazier things have happened. Um, but I don't know if they have yet panned a deal for their watch endorsement. So I'm sure it will be announced soon enough, right? They already have a website where they have this dramatic countdown to the Australian GP, which will start the next season. And I'm kind of excited. Honestly, I'm excited to see Checo back on the grid. I'm excited to see Valtteri Bottas back on the grid as well. And kind of curious about how competitive they can be. But of course, if you are a real F1 fan, it's a new era with new engines and new cars. So there's so much more mystery around what is going to happen. But Checo was wearing the Apex Predator of a watch, the absolute top of the line with the Nautilus Perpetual Calendar, ultra thin, we might also say 5740 Line 1G, executed all in 18 karat white gold. And it is thanks to that caliber 240 base, thanks to that micro rotor movement. It's just a smidgen thicker than the jumbo, whether we're talking about the 5711 or 5811 in this case. Um, I'm very excited actually about all of that, plus the 50th anniversary of the Nautilus coming up, where we might obviously see a whole slew, a whole slate of new releases within that collection. They might actually revise this, right? Discontinue the white gold version and perhaps have something, quote unquote, entirely new in a different case material with a slightly revised design as they had with the 5811G. Who knows? But it's something to look forward to. Hi, Ryan. Nice to see you, man. We have also started with a very humble goal of super chats. 5 super chats of 199 or more will get you another hour of watch talk. You guys know how much I put into these streams. So if you genuinely appreciate what I do, please do show it in more than just likes and encouraging comments in the chat. Much as I appreciate them, they don't feed the cat. They don't pay the rent. So I need your support, and I need to see it in a more tangible way, at least if you expect me to continue on this platform as an independent voice. Now, we are going to also talk about the new AP releases and take a look at the Sotheby's auction. So for me to have time for that, I think I will need your support at any rate. JB, that's great. That's a good start for the night, no? And it's really the best because it reflects an absolute trust in me since 1999, and with no message except for 1 down, 4 to go. Thank you so much, JB. Love you, brother. The U.S. Open coverage continues. I'm a big fan of Omar Sy, actually, the French actor who had this beautiful movie called Untouchables. Fantastic. So I'm a fan already, but he was invited by Ralph Lauren, apparently, to the U.S. Open, and he was wearing this beautiful suede jacket and a reverso, which is kind of like the style final boss, right? You can hardly imagine a higher level of kind of suave sophistication, and I do appreciate that. And the reverso he was wearing is, in fact, the reverso tribute chronograph in the 18 karat pink gold. I've talked very extensively about this piece and complicated reversos in the past, so I don't want to rehearse everything from the beginning, but of course, this is a recreation of something that Gégé Lecoutre done in the 90s in such a compelling, exciting, and path-breaking way, because the movement that powered that watch, which is revived here in modified form, was in fact one of the first, if not the first, in-house chronograph movements of the post-quartz era. In that way, it has even preceded that famous datograph movement by Al Angunzone, the Al 951-1, by a few years at that. Of course, the new movement, whether I like the aesthetics of the older watch better, the original 500-piece limited edition that comes in the slightly more compact, of course, than quite large Kantai case. But this new movement actually has time telling on both sides, on both the recto dial and the verso dial, and they show the same time and operating those two sets of hands independently from each other, yet keeping the same time, that's power hungry. So for them to fit everything in something that's slightly larger, yet with higher power reserve, I think that's pretty impressive. And of course, this is a retrograde complication as well, where you have at 6 o'clock here on the Verseau side a 30-minute counter, which snaps back to zero after 30 minutes are elapsed. So that's Omar Sy and his Reverso tribute chronograph in pink gold. Then we have the King of R&B. King of R&B, another Ralph Lauren guest at the US Open. Usher with his wife, Jennifer Koikochea, or Jennifer Raymond, I guess I should really call her, since she did take Usher's last name. She is carrying a beautiful mint green Hermes Birkin 25, which shouldn't go unnoticed, even though obviously we are a watch channel. We know always more than that. And, we also have to pay homage to the great Archie Luxury, who is a true expert in luxury, knowing about watches and women's handbags, which of course remains my greatest aspiration. Usher was actually wearing the original Yachtmaster 40 in 18 karat yellow gold with this beautiful white dial. You can see it actually has tritium lume plots, like triangles, inside the hour markers, which are rendered in onyx. So a very subtle but luxurious touch. And the Yachtmaster, of course, was originally conceived as some sort of Submariner 2.0. And it was Patrick Heinige's pet project before he actually took the reins of the company as only the third leader in its history, right? There was Hans Wirsdorf at the beginning. There was Andre Heinige, who was Patrick's father, and Patrick Heinige, who took the helm in 1992. I mean, it's quite incredible that this country, I was going to say, which is an interesting slip when talking about Rolex. But until Patrick Heinige left quite abruptly in 2008, literally in those 103 years, in a century plus 3 years, Rolex only had 3 leaders at that executive position. But of course, when it actually came time to introduce the Yachtmaster, which was kind of his coronation present, so to speak, with Patrick Heinige, they couldn't dare, right? The Submariner, especially in early 90s, was their uncontestable icon, and you couldn't simply replace it. So the Yachtmasters became a more luxurious version, in a way, of what the Submariner would not be, because its origins were so much more utilitarian. And I think that this gold piece, the 16628, tells that story, right? Where the Yachtmaster was actually introduced as an ultra luxurious counterpart, something a little more precious in more ways than one, than the Submariner. The gold Yachty indeed looks great, JB. And by the way, you should be very excited this year, right? I think the Bills are actually doing great. Polished raised numerals and the nice jewel markers. Yeah, I think Yachtmaster is a great design. I don't think it gets enough credit. I think it's one of the nice, mostly overlooked watches in stainless steel or in precious metal, right? And I think again, Rolex doesn't like leaving empty spots in their catalog. That's why they took new interest in the Yachtmaster line and used it as a platform to introduce the Oyster Flex, which once again was a slow burner, right? You know, people were quite resistant to the idea of what, a rubber strap on a Rolex. But much like a lot of the improvements and updates that Rolex introduced, what was at first quite undesirable and unexpected from Rolex, mostly because they themselves have established such a conservative reputation. Once the customers actually get to discover it, get to wear it, get to handle it, once it is widespread enough where people can get a hands-on experience, it usually starts flying off the shelves, which is exactly what happened with the Oyster Flex. Right now, precious metal Oyster Flex Rolex sports watches, especially the Daytona, is probably one of the hottest pieces on the market. This one completely went viral almost instantly. Oh yeah, that the platinum one that got sold, right? That was amazing, and I did a whole post on that too. And I'm sure if anyone has missed that, you can easily find it if you follow me on Instagram and if you scroll down a little bit. I did a dedicated post on Patrick Heiniger's personal Yachtmaster that was executed in platinum. Was a beautiful watch. So that's the link to my Instagram, and we are looking specifically on this photo of a post-Bond Daniel Craig, who was in Toronto promoting his new movie, Wake Up Dead Man, which is a Knives Out mystery. He is interestingly wearing a fob chain as a necklace. Maybe it's even a watch chain. I couldn't help but notice that. He's wearing one of my favorite eyewear brands as well, Dylan by Jacques Marimage, and I think it is in the Dune colorway from their Decade collection, which marked their 10th anniversary. And he was wearing a very interesting Omega. This is actually an Omega Seamaster 120, what collectors call the Deep Blue. It is a cushion-cased vintage diver watch from the late 60s, first half of the 70s. And it has true mil-spec credentials, so to speak, with the fully graduated loomed rotational timing bezel in bakelite, the broadsword hands, and a generously loomed dial. Now, again, I don't have any records or definitive proof that these pieces were military supplied, but I did, I have heard over the years many stories where these pieces were actually supplied to frogmen in a few different countries. Let's just pass over that, parse that in this way. And there are versions of it in black too, but a lot of the more interesting examples of this piece are in this deep blue color, which might register as black from certain angles and in certain forms of lighting, but it certainly is a little bluer and than what it might suggest. And I think this example shows that beautifully. And that's the color of both the dial and the bezel itself. And I was kind of musing about how this watch is very fitting to find on a retired 00's wrist. But what I had in mind wasn't really a retired version of Daniel Craig's 007, but someone more in line of the Kincaid character. If you watch the movie Skyfall, you'll remember that there's a gamekeeper or groundskeeper that James Bond introduces to M when they reach the Skyfall estate, right? Who had been there since Bond was very young, and the timeline would somehow fit, right? You know, if this guy ever served, if Kincaid had ever served, this kind of watch would have been on his wrist. This would have been the kind of watch he would be issued. And that role in itself has an interesting history, the Kincaid role in Skyfall, because it turns out that it was actually written by Sean Connery. He was supposed to make a cameo appearance at least, but the idea was to bring him back into the franchise in some way. But the director, Sam Mendes, backed out in the last minute, and the role, the late Albert Finney was cast instead. I think in this day and age, they would have done it the original way in which this character was written, right? You know, and I think it's kind of inevitable that one of the old Bonds will come back to the franchise in some way, even after they cast the new Bond and shoot the first movie. And we should do a poll at some point where we have more viewers, hopefully, to see which Bond you would like to see coming back. Obviously, Lazenby, even though thank God he's still alive, he's retired from public appearances, so I think that rules him out. Of course, Sean Connery has passed, Roger Moore has passed. But in an ideal world, right, where you could bring back, like in actual flesh and blood, which one would you like to? So please write that in the chat if you would. I think, again, in an ideal world, I would have loved to see either Sean Connery or Pierce Brosnan make an appearance in the franchise again. Continuing the theme of Ralph Lauren guests at the US Open, director Spike Lee seems to have come back to his senses, because, you know, he was for quite some time, years ago, one of Rolex's important mentors in their arts initiative, and you know, I already kind of was looking at him in a certain way because of the projects he did customizing certain Rolex pieces. But it was devastating to me to see him with the moon swatches, making public appearances with moon swatches on his wrist. I felt personally aggressed and betrayed because I'm such a Rolex fanboy. But it's good to see him wearing a Rolex again. It's good to see a Rolex on his wrist again. And in this case, it's an Oyster Perpetual 41 with the coral red dial. Of course, this was one of the popular dials when in 2020 Rolex revitalized their Oyster Perpetual series. And in fact, the success itself perhaps undercut that revitalization, and they had to do a lot of shuffling within that line. The coral red itself was entirely discontinued because it doesn't exist in 31, 36, or 41 anymore. By the way, they were hanging out together apparently. And actually, the sweater that Spike Lee is wearing is fantastic too, and it's great for him because this is from the Morehouse collection. Ralph Lauren, I think it was a couple of years ago that they did kind of a Black Ivy collection, right, where they released a lot of preppy clothing in collaboration with some of the HBCUs. And more recently, they released another Morehouse College collaboration. And obviously, Spike Lee being an alumnus of that university, it made absolute sense for him to wear that particular sweater. But there he is with his OP41 with the coral red dial. This is a new signing with the Turkish club Galatasaray. Also the Turkish national football team goalkeeper. He was wearing the Patek Philippe Nautilus 5712 Line 1R. This is an absolutely boss watch, of course. Once again, what I like about these kinds of complications on the Nautilus is how, thanks to the microrotor movement, the caliber 240, they preserve that slim, sleek, elegant profile of the original Gérard Genta design while adding something original, while to the configuration, while bringing something different to the table. And 5712 perhaps does that better than anyone else. Oh, I already did this. So, by the way, I'm always, as I'm talking about these posts, I also add the links in the chat. So if you would give them a few likes, drop a few comments, I would really, really appreciate that. If you are not following me on Instagram already, please do so. If you're coming over from Instagram, please make sure to subscribe here. Every passing day, I try to put more work, more effort, and make more content here, hopefully beyond the live streams as well. So please stay tuned and stay subscribed. Hi, Piruka. Swiss, how are you doing, man? It's been a while. Here's one of the biggest influencers who has apparently become a professional wrestler as well, Logan Paul, with his wife, Nina Agdal. Nina Agdal is actually a Danish model who famously posed for the Sports Illustrated swimsuit issue. And she was wearing the interesting watch here, and that is a ladies' Nautilus in stainless steel with that opaline gray dial with the original wave motif. And again, what I really like about the 7118, the self-winding ladies Nautilus that has been part of the catalog for a full decade by now is the fact that it goes beyond offering something simply in reduced size or mid-sized proportions, right? It is actually a different design, has these rounded hour markers, rounded alpha hands, which are different from the standard set of dial furniture for the Nautilus. It also has the date window at 6 o'clock, and it counterbalances that with a single Arabic numeral at 12. Otherwise, again, you get the same aesthetics, pardon me, everything that is great about the design. 1718 is, by the way, powered by the same self-winding movement as its quote-unquote jumbo counterparts. When it was first introduced, it was the 324 SC, and nowadays it's the caliber 26-330 SC. But in either case, what you get ultimately is something that is 8.62 millimeters in thickness and right around 35.2 millimeters in diameter. And I think it's a great woman's watch, great woman's Patek. Brody, thank you. Yeah, we can shift gears and talk about that a little bit. Thank you so much for that generous super chat. Let's give it a full read. And I will actually use one of my posts as a segue for this. So I'm going to jump ahead to this one, because obviously it wasn't a coincidence that John Mayer, with an episode that was released today, no, it's completely okay, Brody, was wearing Code 1159 Flying Tourbillon with a stone dial. Brody 999, thank you so much. He's also a member of the channel, so a great supporter. New AP releases bore me, always unobtainable and overpriced. Unfortunately, that's become part of course. Doesn't change the very limited choices for new customers. You can get a Patek or F. Bejon Perpetual Calendar as a first piece for less money. I'm not sure if I can counter that, but let's see. So John Mayer just posted a new episode of his podcast that he does in collaboration with SiriusXM, How's Life with John Mayer, and he was talking with a fellow Grammy-winning musician, Sierra Farrell, about what makes a Grammy-winning song. And I noticed immediately that there was something new, something unique on the wrist. And I've always struggled with this idea because I'm not very talented when it comes to graphics, right? I've never been a Photoshop guy, so I can't do a mock-up to save my life. But thankfully, the AI has gotten to a level where we can manipulate images in a very intentional way. So I was able to mock up actually a version of the turquoise dial Code 1159 self-winding Flying Tourbillon that he was wearing. I strongly believe it's a stone dial. I thought that it was a stone dial the first minute I see it, because there's this vein right here that I tried to somehow replicate in the mock-up. That being said, if it might be just a Tiffany colored dial, but since today, AP released a bunch of different stone dial Code 1159 Flying Tourbillons as well, alongside the 38 millimeter perpetual calendars. I believe it's a stone dial, and so far, the only similar thing before today's releases that existed in the AP catalog was this sodalite dial piece that was called a special edition, which happens to be in 41 millimeter 18 karat white gold with a natural sodalite dial for the backdrop, and of course the self-winding flying tourbillon cage at 6 o'clock. You guys know, and I also did a mock-up with just a turquoise colored dial, and I think in each case it's a pretty interesting looking piece. There we go. Yeah, let's talk about those. I'm gonna just share this very quickly, where Rami Malek made an appearance at the Toronto Film Festival with fellow actor Russell Crowe. Both are part of an upcoming movie called simply Nuremberg, about the Nuremberg trials. I've been expecting this movie for a long time, so I'm very, very intrigued. You guys know that Rami Malek is a Cartier ambassador, but he was wearing a pretty interesting piece, nevertheless, which is a Benoit, their classic oval-shaped watch, but with a case that is fully set with brilliant cut diamonds. As you can see, this is what the watch looks like. It also has a single diamond topping off the beaded crown as well, instead of some sort of cabochon. I just wanted to share that. Yeah, let's go. Brody, let me know if you want the long version or the short version about what I think, because I think you covered a lot of what is disappointing about Audemars Piguet in this particular day and age, with or without the new releases. It's just I wanted to pull up something here. It's just the retail experience has become so exasperating, and that, you know, we don't need to necessarily single out Audemars Piguet with that. And by the way, there are many who have commented about how AP in a way is more transparent, not necessarily more fair, but more transparent about the transactional nature of the initial set of purchases that you have to make before you can get what you really want, which is still disappointing, right? You know, which can still result in disgruntled customers, and it has, and it does. However, you know, sometimes you have to commend them for being quite open about what may be understood, quote unquote, as a bundling practice. Of course, it's not necessarily bundling, because there's always time between the discrete purchases, right? So because they want to push away that kind of accusation, but that's another point altogether. So your points are well taken, right? Most of what seems very interesting about AP, whether it is in the way of new releases or the timeless classics of the catalog, they will be unobtainable at the point of retail if you're a new customer. They are overpriced because AP is very cognizant about how these pieces or what these pieces trade for on the secondary market. So they don't actually want to give you a good deal for buying things at retail. And there are always very limited choices for new customers, right? Literally, if you are just beginning, quote unquote, your relationship with AP, and if you want to get a watch relatively quickly, sometimes even immediately, the only things that are offered to you are oversized offshore chronographs, right? 43 and 42 millimeters in diameter, or simple time-only Code 1159s and some Code 1159 chronographs, right? Nothing too fancy. Not one with a popular dial configuration, but that is it. Now, the experiences of Patek and Jean are, I think, different, and they're very different from each other, because with Patek you mostly are beholden to your local jeweler, right? Your local authorized dealer. So it really depends where you are, and I'm not sure it's always the case that you can get a Patek perpetual calendar as your first watch. I don't know, that hasn't been my experience. I think I would have been quite happy if something like that was offered to me, but I was never that fortunate. And you guys know, at any rate, right? I'm not a big proponent of buying things at retail. I like stuff that is a better deal on the secondary market. But that's another point altogether. And when it comes to Jean, honestly, you can get a lot of things as your first watch in Jean, but they make you wait years, literally. So they might actually give you a perpetual calendar as your first piece, but you'll wait for 3 years, right? I mean, I'm sure someone has a story that proves to be an exception. I'm sure of it, right? So feel free to drop it in the chat. I don't want to say that it never happens, but considering how popular FP Jean has become, considering how they have become ever present with any number of their own boutiques, with major marquee event auctions that were exclusively focused on FP Jean, with Mr. Wonderful, becoming kind of an unofficial mouthpiece for them. It's gotten out of control. So New York or Los Angeles, which are the two boutiques I know, they're very nice. They're, again, very transparent. They are not trying to sell you what you don't want, but they're also quite specific about telling you that you will wait for years. If you want anything oddly specific that is not a standard issue chronomètre souverain as your first watch, right? And I'm not even talking about asking for a chronomètre bleu or an elegant in elegant 48, so on and so forth. I'm talking about, let's say I want the sports series, rattrapante chronograph, for example. I want the perpetual calendar. You will wait for years. Maybe some others have connections that work differently, and I don't. That's completely possible, but that is it. Now, to talk about the backdrop of the complications, since Brody allowed me to go long, we mentioned yesterday that Ilaria Resta's appointment signified a cultural change, And it was a big statement, especially because it came at the same time as when AP appointed a woman as their CEO for North America. AP appointed, of course, Ilaria Resta as their new CEO, but they have also appointed Anne Gaël Quinet as their head of complications, which I tried to explain last night is really public-facing position, even though the title might suggest otherwise. Right, and that doesn't change the fact that Anne-Gaëlle Quinet is someone who is a true watchmaker, trained and worked with Patek and Breguet for 2 decades before coming to AP. It's still more than simply designing and conceiving new complications or producing unique takes on complications, but also coming forward to tell about these complications, teach about these complications to the larger public, including also to points of retail for AP. But we were talking about also how we are still far away from that cultural shift in terms of the new product lines that were introduced. And I think even this release doesn't quite cover that, because once again, these are the kinds of releases we already had, we simply have smaller case dimensions for a few different models. But it still means something, right? Here in a Hodinkee interview from a couple of years back with Anne-Gaëlle Quinet, Mark Kauzlaric is asking her, when you're talking about making watches that have more feminine quality, right? That has been an explicit goal of AP since that transition at the highest level of their executive branch, so to speak. Is it a size consideration or an aesthetic consideration like the Carolina Bucci release? What are you seeing that clients are looking for, or are you hoping that you can bring through your own experiences as input? And Quinet says size is very important, of course, but of course, for example, I'm wearing the 41 millimeter Royal Oak Perpetual Calendar, and I really love it. I do. And I feel 41 is fine, but I would love to develop a complication that fits everyone, not only women, but also men. Right? Great way to put it, right? Because a smaller case diameter doesn't simply mean that we now have a feminine watch. You simply have a watch that can probably be worn by more people rather than people who feel just as comfortable right at home with watches that have a larger diameter. The other day, she says, I had a chance to wear a classic 39 millimeter Perpetual Calendar, the 2120 caliber Royal Oak, and for me, 39 is just perfect. So, in fact, coming fast forward to today, you realize that, in fact, this release was already in the offing for a couple of years. And Brody agrees, by the way, with what I just described about Jean. 2-3 year wait for first pieces at FP Jean, but the process is transparent and fair. If that's been your experience, and it overlaps with mine and what I've been hearing from my friends and my clients, I think we can give it a stamp of approval. Coming back to AP, we figure out that these were releases that they have been working on for already a few years. And of course, pardon me, with product cycles being at least 3 years, that much we could already guess. But it was something that they explicitly stated, right? They want to release complicated watches that are actually available in more compact dimensions. And I want to add another layer to what Kine was already saying, right? You know, that by doing that, they weren't only catering to women, but also to men who prefer smaller cased pieces. I think they're also catering overall to another level of horological enthusiasm, because if you know about the history of complications in wristwatches, you would also know that it was miniaturization that opened the way for those complications that we today recognize as classic, as elite, as high horological. What was really impressive about Patek announcing perpetual calendars and perpetual calendar chronographs in the midst of the Second World War was not only the historical context, but also the fact that they had made these compact pieces that could actually be worn on your wrist on a daily basis, rather than being carried in huge pocket watches, right? The fact that they managed to miniaturize those complications to be worn on the wrists was the main charm, that main appeal of those pieces. So when you think of a 38 millimeter perpetual calendar, that's something quite meaningful as well, from a horological standpoint as well, and that's ungendered, right? You know, you can be enthusiastic about horology and miniaturization, whatever your sexual orientation is, whatever your gender is. So just to add another layer, and they did something different here, right? You know, they didn't just take a slightly modified jumbo case in 39 millimeter, which was the case, no pun intended, with classic perpetual calendars before AP switched to 41 millimeter as their standard for a lot of their complications, not only the perpetual calendar. This is something different because it offers 38 millimeter in diameter for the Royal Oak perpetual calendar and for the Code 11 59 perpetual calendar. The new 39 millimeter Royal Oak perpetual calendar is 9.4 millimeters thick, whereas the Code 11 59 perpetual calendar in 38 millimeters is a smidgen under 10, roughly 9.9 millimeters. And this entire line is based on a variant of the new caliber 7138s. That one, right, that doesn't require any pin pushers, where you can adjust the entire calendar with the crown, forwards and backwards, and also with its discrete functions connected to different positions of the crown, which is really what is original and unique about it, beyond the fact that it is actually so user-friendly and wearable, so ergonomic, as AP has put it. This one does away with the weak indication, which actually, again, for enthusiasts of the more minimalist, more balanced, you might say, more uncluttered design of those classic AP Royal Oak perpetual calendars, this can be also a selling point in a way, because you have that balanced 4 subdial layout. Of course, here you have both a day-night indicator and leap year indicator, which were already introduced, the leap year indicator specifically, to the line quite early on, you might say. And I think, again, they look beautiful. I think they bring something new to the table for anyone who prefers a more compact watch, whether that's an aesthetic concern or a logical interest. It is a different design than what was before and than what they have available now. And they also have, of course, they included this in the 150th anniversary celebrations, where you have 150 pieces of each model with this cursive font to commemorate. And you have the Royal Oak in steel with kind of ice blue dial. You have the Royal Oak in pink gold. With a champagne dial of sorts, which they call beige. And then for the Code 1159 in pink gold, you actually have that embossed green dial, which I think actually is honestly, it looks beautiful. I don't like the Code 1159 as a design, so I'm not too hot about the case at all. But that being said, in terms of the colors chosen, in terms of the balance of the dial, the framing and everything, it looks great. And that, as you can see, because it has that inner bezel, accommodates the weekly indication quite easily. So unlike the Royal Oaks, which have done away with it in 38 millimeter compact sizing, the Code 1159 in 38 millimeter actually keeps the weekly indication. And that's, I think, also one of the reasons why it's a smidgen thicker. Or vice versa, right? Chicken or the egg kind of thing. And it's perhaps because Code 1159 is already slightly thicker in all its variations compared to the Royal Oak, it can actually fit the version of the caliber that has the weekly calendar. So overall, I think the idea of once again creating complicated pieces that are more compact is unimpeachable. The fact that they brought back also some aesthetic elements of the classic look of the Royal Oak perpetual calendar, I think is again laudable. That being said, as Brody has already mentioned, and I can't really contest any part of that, at the end of the day, these are the kinds of pieces. Forget about the 150 piece limited run at the beginning, which will be for the anniversary. These are the kind of pieces that will be available to already established clients with, disproportionate spending histories compared to potentially yours, especially if you are a new client. And that, of course, sours the story. At any rate, like Brody also implied, the price point itself, right, precludes already a lot, right? Because what we have is, in fact, 120,000 in Swiss francs for the pink gold Royal Oak Perpetual Calendar in 38 millimeters. And for the stainless steel Royal Oak, it's 110 or 111 in US dollars. And then for the code 1159, it's the same price, basically 111,000 for the code 1159 38 millimeter perpetual calendar. Now, on top of these, they also released 38 millimeter flying tourbillons with natural stone dials. These are apparently limited edition references in the Code 1159 collection. All three feature a more compact 38 millimeter case. And the three dial options are ruby root, blue sodalite, and green malachite. Apparently, the ruby root was sourced from Tanzania. Sodalite was sourced from Brazil, and malachite was sourced from Zambia. And of course, all these are powered by the caliber 2968, which is an ultra-thin, self-winding flying tourbillon movement that AP uses widely in their catalog, not only in Code 1159s, but also a number of stunningly impressive Royal Oak Perpetual calendars as well. Titanium cage with a peripheral drive for reduced weight and dimensions, where the tourbillon sits on that same level with the dial, which is both technically impressive and aesthetically pleasant, highly efficient and very precise and beautiful on the wrist. And obviously, in each case, you have kind of a strap that is complementary to the dial color. And the ruby root is actually paired with a white gold case, whereas malachite and sodalite in this collection of the 38 millimeter flying tourbillon for Code 1159 are actually presented in 18 karat pink gold. That's the sodalite again, the ruby root, and malachite. Malachite and gold, just, I think that's also a winning combination. I would love to have a day date like that. That would be fantastic. These are actual limited editions, as far as I'm given to understand. 150 pieces each. And as Brody says, the pricing for this trio is 110,000 in US dollars. Honestly, again, I really thought that by now, because it's been more than 6 years, and I'm a very opinionated person. I'm not going to deny that, but I'm also known to change my mind and adjust my views on topics as time goes by. I was genuinely hoping that one day I will wake up and I will actually like Code 1159, but that hasn't happened in the 6 years that has passed. And if it happens from now on, I think that would be one way of figuring out that I have sold out, right? Someone paid me a bunch of money or made me endorse these things for me to like them. I just don't like the design. I think it's like complicated for no reason. I think it's such a complicated for no reason, as in, like, you want to introduce a watch that's not the Royal Oak, yet give it an octagonal mid case, which is a nod to the Royal Oak. It has so many different design elements that are cherry picked from different parts of the industry, where you have brands that execute them so much better, whether we are talking about that curved crystal or the pierced lugs. Whatever, I don't want to go on and on about this, but probably, if I didn't have that sort of almost if I didn't have that sort of gut reaction against the Code 1159, I wouldn't mind having a flying tourbillon in that particular case configuration, in that particular presentation. I genuinely enjoy these as designs. I think the flying tourbillons in Code 1159 in 41 millimeter cases are also quite great. And yeah, malachite, I always combine in my head with yellow gold. And if you're a soccer fan, you will know why. So let's see if someone figures it out. So I'm sure it would look just fine in white gold as well. But there's a particular reason as to why I prefer that in white gold. By the way, despite the generous contributions of JB and Brody, I don't think we made it in terms of our goal. So we might be getting close enough to closing. JB says if I take the code, it would be the star wheel. I don't know. Honestly, I think there's so many great alternatives to the the code 1159 star wheel in AP's own back catalog that it doesn't. To me, it looks like it looks like an homage that some other brand did to AP's Wandering Hours complication. That's what the code 1159 star wheel looks like to me. I feel that both the round cased 36 millimeter classic versions of the star wheel and the millinery pieces that were released for the 125th anniversary with the star wheel complication, they're just better looking watches to me. It just doesn't. I just don't like code 1159, man. It doesn't lend itself to anything for me. But I guess so far, the self-winding flying tourbillons and the new generation of perpetual calendars are my favorites. So let's take a look before it's too late to this Sotheby's auction. There are a lot of watches in it, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to. You know what? I will go for another 15 minutes at least. But if I get another $20 super chat, I'll actually end up going until 12:30. How about that? So I will set that as a goal. One super chat of $20 or more, and that will send me off to at least 12:30. But let's start talking about these watches a little bit. As always, you guys know how this works. I send you the link right here in the chat. The link to the auction listings are in the chat. If you want me to take a closer look on any of the lots, you send in a super chat that has the lot number, and I will be more than happy to shift gears and dive deep into that particular lot and talk about the watch with as much horological and historical detail as possible. They decided to start very strong and put Platinum Daytona as the very first lot. Lot number 8601 is actually a region-specific version of the Platona 116506, and this is the one with the applied Eastern Arabic or Hindu Arabic numerals. This is the one I actually used in my thumbnail for today's show. Of course, just like its version in this generation with the luminous dial, it has the sunburst ice blue or glacier blue backdrop, the maroon outer rings for the chronograph registers, which of course echo the Cerachrome material for the tachymeter bezel, and that's also in that maroon or chestnut brown color. I recognize how special this is and how much more rare it is compared to other variations of the Platinum Daytona. although I feel these are not as hot as they once were, now that we have 3 variations of the Daytona Le Mans, as well as a new generation of Platinum Daytonas. Nevertheless, the collectors are still interested in these. I think it's a little bit too crowded for me to have these numerals on a chronograph dial. I think they are better executed on a platinum day date dial, which I much prefer. But hey, again, horses for courses. There are a lot of people who like these, and this will be a very interesting watch for those who have been chasing after one, who have been looking for one for some years, and you can see that this is an example that still has its stickers on. So it's absolutely pristine, brand new, never worn, from 2021. This, by the way, is an auction that's based in Hong Kong, and the current bids stands right around 122,000 in US dollars. Speaking of platinum pieces, here's another heavy hitter. This is the Patek Philippe World Time 5131 line 1P. It's the platinum on the 5-row beads of rice style bracelet. It has that element which has become quite iconic and distinctive about contemporary platinum Patek Philippe watches. That single brilliant cut diamond that is set between the lugs at 6 o'clock. And here it's given that special nook, that special treatment on the bracelet as well, so that it remains somewhat visible from the right angle. Of course, since this is an earlier example of the world time, it still has Hong Kong on the dial instead of Beijing. So it might be interesting merely due to that for some collectors. But of course, what makes it even more special beyond this combination of platinum case and platinum bracelets is the cloisonné enamel depiction of a section from the world map on its center dial. And it is a part of the world map that somehow resonates with what we might associate with the coolness, some might say coldness, we might associate with the case material, right? And it is, I think, what it depicts is the Arctic Circle, the northern hemisphere, so the coasts of Canada and Russia and some other northern territories there. And of course, as with most variations of Patek's modern world timer, it does run on a variation of caliber 240, which is a micro rotor movement, which gives you once again that sleek, thin, beautiful wrist feel that I think makes for a very elegant watch. And I think that's just infinitely superior when it comes to a dress watch, right? With the integrated bracelet watches, we can, I guess, go back and forth. I still think that the ultra thin profile is what really honors Gerard Janta's original 1970s designs. But I understand what some others expect from sports watches, and I know that they want something more robust, or at least something with more heft on the wrist. But when it comes to a dress watch, especially in platinum, you get all the heft from the material anyway, so you might as well go for something that is ultra thin and elegant like this. So it's a great thing that Patek does to preserve that micro rotor caliber for their World Time series. And I think this is too obvious, but I shouldn't assume, so I want to share it simply. By definition, right, micro rotor calibers are going to be slimmer than their closest self-winding counterpart with a full rotor, simply because a micro rotor you sink into the same level as the bridges of that movement. So you are already shaving off some measure of thickness from the movement, because at the end of the day, the rotor you install on top of those bridges. And also you get basically, especially when you have an exhibition case back, you get basically most of the technical advantage that you gain from a hand wound movement, which is again by definition slimmer because you don't need a rotor. And again, if you're exhibiting the movement, you also get a fuller view of that movement, both in terms of its bridges and the larger layout on the main plate, because your view is not interrupted by a solid mass or even by an open work mass. You simply look right at it. And this is lot 8602 for the Patek Philippe World Time in platinum on a matching platinum bracelet, 5131 line 1P. The piece is currently being bid at 102,725 in US dollars. There's a white gold version of this reference that we were looking at. This is the 5131G, once again with a Clausenet enamel dial, which this time has Oceania, Australia, really, Asia, Africa, and Europe at the center of its depiction. The Clausenet enamel dials are really special because they are essentially micro paintings where the lines, where the outline is traced with hairline threads of gold, and where the entire process takes multiple firings in the oven using enamel powder to set the right colors. So the rejection rates are quite high, which means that it takes a lot of time and painstaking work to produce perfect examples of these dials. And in this case, of course, speaking of being able to contemplate things that have a certain level of artistic or horological craft, here Patek uses classic observatory style hand, so you get more, you get to see more of this map. Again, a Hong Kong dial for this piece. Jamie sold his world timer? Is he what? That's wild to me. That I thought that was his entire horological identity. Who is he even after he sold his world timer? I don't know. At any rate, we're looking at a white gold example of reference 5131. A beautiful world time wristwatch by Patek Philippe in white gold with a cloisonné enamel depiction of Africa, Australia, Europe, and Asia. The piece is currently being bid at 64,200 in US dollars. That was lot 8606. We have something quite exquisite and rare at 8610, lot 8610. You guys know I have done an episode on this, on the differences between the 3712 and the 5712. I've already confessed my adoration for the Nautilus moon phase. But the 3712 was basically the first iteration of it. So the ancestor of the reference we have today, it was made for about a year, possibly less, because it was quickly replaced on the 30th anniversary of the design in 2006 when the 5712 came out. And this is a version of it that is double sealed, which is essentially how it left the factory. I don't know who was prescient or lucky enough to have not only bought it that way, but preserved it exactly in this way. Insanity, right? Something so rare, something so precious, and something that is in absolutely pristine condition. This is not an unworn watch. This is not a stickered watch. This is actually a watch from probably exactly 20 years ago, exactly as it left the factory. The Nautilus moon phase, the original reference, which is 3712 line 1A. And the piece is currently being bid at 850,000 in Hong Kong dollars, which is just short of 110,000 in US dollars. Yeah, I know the Jamie you are talking about is Jamie Opulence, but yeah, the world time was his horological identity. And so I'm not surprised that he isn't really around anymore. And more power to him, right? Priorities change, and watches don't always have to be at the center of those priorities. So Much respect to him. Okay, so I think we are not really making that goal either, meaning that I will talk about two more pieces and bid you farewell. And since we have been pretty Patek heavy so far, why don't we just continue exactly like that? Lot 8612, which is a reference of the Nautilus Jumbo, the 5711 line 1A, with the white dial, with the polar white dial, we would say if this were a Rolex, but because of the contrast between the dial, which is white, and the blackened dial furniture, Patek collectors call this the piano dial, right? Because the hour markers kind of have this feel or look of piano keys. Not exactly, but you can see how people came up with that particular nickname for this watch. Of course, in all the other ways, this piece is exactly just like the classic 5711 with the blue dial, with a black gradient rim, with a classic straight line ribbed design or decoration, except this one has a white dial. This is the 5711, the Patek Philippe Nautilus Jumbo with the white dial, with the so-called platinum dial in stainless steel. Lot 8612 has not yet attracted any bids, but the starting bid would be right around 102,725 in US dollars. And we have actually a 5711, which is at lots 8619 with the classic black and blue dial. The 5711 line 1A, which is being bid at 83,464 US dollars at lot 8619. We have, just for the sake of variation, we have a white gold version of the Nautilus moon phase, the 5712G, presented on a leather strap with a gray dial that matches rather well with the white gold case. Of course, powered with a micro rotor movement from the lineage of caliber 240. And that piece at lot 8621 has not yet attracted any bids, but the starting bid would be right around 64,200 in US dollars. This is Sotheby's Hong Kong. The link is right there, Tickle My Talk. I don't know if you didn't see it in the chat, but it is right there. I will post it again. If you have any last minute requests of a lot that you would want me to take a look at, feel free to send it in with a super chat. But otherwise, I'm signing off. Lot 8625 is another Nautilus, the Richmond's Bluesy, as it was called. For a while, it was one of the rare two-tone executions that remained in the Patek Philippe catalog. This is the 5980 line 1AR. It has been now discontinued, if I'm not mistaken. And you guys know I'm also, not being a fan of the Nautilus in general, I am actually a huge fan of Patek's modern self-winding chronographs, which give you this relatively uncluttered dial thanks to that integration of a crosshair style chronograph presentation into a single chronograph register, right? Where you have at the very center a 12-hour counter, then a full 60-minute totalizer that wraps itself around that in two concentric circles from 0 to 30 on the outer periphery, and then right in the middle, 30 to 60. This is a look at that movement specifically. Right now, of course, you have the white gold version with that denim style strap for this Nautilus chronograph, but the movement is the same, right? The CH 28520C. Stainless steel and pink gold, the 5980 line 1AR. This is lot 8625. The piece has not yet attracted any bids, but the starting bid would be just short of 90,000 in US dollars. All right, that's it for tonight. We have started making some headway into this Sotheby's online auction that has just started. And I think it's going to go until September 18th, 11 a.m. Hong Kong time. So already about 7 days until lots begin to close. We'll have plenty of time over the next few days to go over my selections from this auction. So no rush. We talked about the new AP releases, the perpetual calendars, and the flying tourbillons between the more compact Royal Oak perpetual calendars and the more compact options for the perpetual calendar and the flying tourbillon with code 1159. And we have also talked about some of the hottest watches that I documented on my Instagram account, which you should absolutely follow. If you have followed me from Instagram, because I posted the link there, you should certainly stay subscribed here. I have a lot of interesting content here on daily basis, both in the form of live streams and other exclusive content. If you want to support the platform, YouTube offers you a number of ways. Of course, you can always send in a super chat, either with a question or just to show your appreciation. When you leave a comment after this live stream ends, which you should, you can use a super thanks to boost that. And of course, you can always buy or gift others a subscription, a membership, which will give you access to exclusive content with great insights into the secondary market. So I hope you would consider that. If all else fails, I outline other ways to support the channel in the video description, and that's absolutely vital. I'm completely independent, which means that I serve you and you only, but that comes with the drawback that I also fully depend on your support, since I'm not being bought by any gray market dealer. I'm not linked with any powers that be within the industry. Even though I cover the auctions quite widely, they don't support me in any way. So I would generally appreciate if you would support me, precisely because I am sharing with you on a regular basis my knowledge and my insights into the world of watches. At any rate, please hit the like button. I appreciate your spectatorship, and I don't take it for granted. And I want to thank specifically Jake Brooks and Brody for their generous super chats. It means a lot. And I will hopefully see you in the next one. And I hope you stay safe, stay healthy, wear and enjoy your watches. Until soon. Bye.